Hey, what is up, everybody? We're back at it again with reading Forget Me Not. I almost started on chapter 8 because I thought I already did chapter 7, but apparently I didn't. Well, that's my bad. I mean, the chapter's like really short, so I don't know. Anyway, let's get into that. We fucked up. Patrick turned his head towards his companion for the briefest moment before focusing back on the red piece of scrap metal he was holding. Rolling it over in his hands, mindful of the sharp edges, he frowned before picking up a similar piece off the ground nearby. It was barely the size of a fingernail, or the fingernail of his thumb. I was doing so well, I thought I upgraded, but apparently I didn't. But each edge was incredibly sharp. If he accidentally cut himself on one of the pieces, he could have to get stitches. What? That's on you, writer. He could have to get stitches. I think you mean would have. That's on you, writer. Not me. Huh. I mean, we really fucked up. This is at least 100 times worse than we started with the started the apocalypse. Apocalypse? Yikes. We're not even 2 minutes in, and I'm fucking terrible. God. The entire field was covered in pieces of scrap metal and wire. They were largely small pieces, admittedly, so there didn't seem to be enough to form an actual weapon out of any of them. Even if they could, trying to find all of the tiny shards amongst the blue flowers would be nearly impossible. Besides, neither of them had Red Leader's knack for building things. At best, they were pilots, and they had crashed more planes than they could have counted at this point. Why are you still in the army, then? Tord? Why the hell? I mean, at least nobody died. Shooting a look back at Paul! Fucking piece of shit! No, this is Paul! Shooting a look back at Paul again, Patrick frowned as Paul shrugged. Looking away pointedly, his one uncovered eye avoided, you mean uncovered eye, avoided looking anywhere near Patrick. Of course, that wasn't true. Sure, the apocalypse had been incredibly short, just like this chapter, but a lot of people had lost their lives. I almost said vibes. What is wrong with me today? Fuck! They had almost died themselves to the massive hordes of zombies. Well, nobody we cared about anyway. We don't know he's dead, Patrick replied softly, standing back up again as he walked over to the other pilot. Really, bodyguard was probably a better term. They were just supposed to keep Red Leader safe and well, they're idiots. Why are you hiring idiots to keep you safe? Look what happened. And they had completely failed this time around. Yeah. No shit. The most important person in their army as mission in action, possibly dead, and it was all their fault. They shouldn't have let him go out on a mission so soon after the incident. He had still been on painkillers. They hadn't even been able to remove the bandages from his arm yet, and even with the stitches and staples, it wouldn't stop bleeding. Good job, you two. Good fucking job. Y'all had one job. It was no condition for anyone to be moving, especially not the leader of their entire movement. He should have been focused on resting and recovering. He should have just given out orders and let everyone else act instead of getting his hands dirty. But, like, what's the fun in that? If you're going to do something, do it yourself. Especially if it's a dirty job. He should have. He should have. They should have been more outspoken about him not going. He had just been a tip about some stolen tech. Something anyone else could have easily done. The tech had been old, the warehouse had been deserted for years, and the price on his head had gone up significantly. But he had insisted. All but yanked the ivy out of his arm and shoved his way out of the base, grumbling the entire time he pulled on his sweatshirt. The sweatshirt. He wouldn't wear anything else. They shouldn't have let him go. He got out on fire. What? He got out of the fire. He got out of the fire, Patrick added, letting the pieces of scrap metal fall to the ground. He couldn't get the image out of his mind. The entire warehouse burning. The windows blown out and flames hungrily licking the sky. The two of them standing there, close enough to feel the intense heat. The slow, dull realization that it was just the two of them standing there. Oh. I don't ship it, but oh. Tord hadn't escaped the warehouse. Just because we didn't find a corpse doesn't mean he got out, Paul snapped. Silence fell over the field as he scratched the side of his face, near the bandages that covered his right eye. It always seemed to itch more when he was uncomfortable or stressed out. He didn't like this. No shit, who would? They shouldn't be fighting like this when everything was already so bad. Only a few seconds passed before Paul sighed and walked over to Paul. This is Patrick! Fuck! Paul sighed and walked over to motherfucking Patrick. Patrick, reaching out and holding his hand reassuringly. I'm sorry, you're right. Patrick looked down. If you can hear that, that is a rude ass plane. Patrick looked down at his hand quietly before giving Paul's hand a small squeeze. We're going to find him, he insisted softly. And if we don't, we aren't coming back. So this is a really short chapter, so I'm just going to skip over to chapter 8 too. Which is also kind of a short chapter, but many paragraphs. I am not paid enough for this. Okay. Tord bolted upright off the couch, grasping his shoulder as an intense pain jolted him out of an otherwise dead sleep. That was a fail right from the start. Gasping for air, he doubled over, his fingers digging into his own shoulder just above where the bandages started. Minutes crawled by before the pain finally died down to a slow burn. Slowly tearing his hand away from his shoulder, he pressed it against his forehead, closing his eyes and trying to simultaneously fight off the waves of dizziness washing over him and stop more tears from leaving the corners of his eyes. It was getting worse. His arm had barely hurt when he had first woken up in that field, but now it was enough to wake him up out of a deep sleep. Dead sleep. It's not dead sleep. I'm pretty sure it's deep sleep because he wasn't dead. Anyway, Ed had said it was more important that they remove the bandages, even if he had retracted this statement after Tord's response to trying to cut it off. Your arm or the bandages? He didn't know why he had panicked. He had just seen the scissors get close to him and dig under the bandages to cut them off. And then they were pressed up against his skin, and the metal was cold and sharp and too close. Get away from him! Sucking in another breath, he grasped at the sleeve of his fucking new hoodie, giving his bandaged arm a small squeeze. The sharp pain grounded him again and choked back a soft sob. I have a feeling you could have put he choked. But then again, I suck at writing. So what do I know? Ed was still sleeping. He couldn't wake up after he had been so nice to him. At least one of them deserved to rest easy. Shifting his legs slowly until his feet were resting flat on the floor, he slowly moved his hand away from his arm to grasp at the blankets covering his body and push them off. It was too many, really, but Ed had insisted and kept adding more and more blankets until he was practically sweating underneath all of them. Oh god, that's uncomfortable. He had given him 4 pillows as well and still apparently had enough sleep on himself, which brought up an entirely different question of just how many sheets Ed actually had in his apartment. God. After he had left, Tord had just dropped 2 of the pillows onto the floor and slept with one under his head while holding the last pillow in a chokehold. It felt more natural sleeping that way. 2 really was the perfect amount. I sleep that way. Slowly finding his feet, Tord slowly wandered through the apartment, briefly passing the open door leading into the bedroom before making his way into the bathroom. I swear to God, I thought I was going to fuck that one up, but I didn't. Claps for Zaxxon, yay! He closed the door behind him and, after a moment, locked it before turning his attention to the mirror above the sink. He looked awful. He'd probably be the first one to admit it since Ed was too nice for his own good, and he didn't actually know anybody else who could comment. But the lack of sleep and illness had hit him hard. Ed is way too nice here. I'm being a little nitpicky, but Ed is part asshole. Actually, one of the biggest assholes. Maybe even more asshole than Tord. But yeah, that's my problem with this fanfic. Nothing really else, but Ed is not a sweetheart. Fully. There were heavy bags under his eyes, and he looked wrong. Like all the color had flushed from his face all at once. His hand drifted down to his sleeve, and for a brief moment he paused. The previous shirt he had been wearing had the sleeve ripped off, making it so it was next to impossible not to see his arm on a regular basis. What if it was worse now and the blood soaking through the bandages was much worse? He almost didn't want to even check. I would. Hell yeah. Clenching his jaw, he grasped his sleeve with a shaking hand and yanked it up in a sharp movement, all the way up to his elbow. The bandages started at his wrist and went all the way up to his shoulder, and he could see the open section where Ed had started to cut the bandages off. Even though the opening was small, he could see the discoloration of skin and the sheen of metal underneath from the shapes. He had no idea how far up the metal pieces went and how many there were. Same thing. But you are fucking rude, car. Crash! Where the fuck was I? But even from the small window, it was clear his arm was in bad shape. He really didn't want to see more. Just leave it be, ignore it. If he didn't face the problem at all, did he even have to acknowledge it? The rational part of him knew. Unfortunately, it didn't work like that. But as of late, that part tended to be completely overshadowed by the rest of him. Still, with the shaking hands, he grasped at the frayed end of the bandage and gave it a small pull. The cloth gave way slightly. Not silently, slightly. Brain. Fuck you. Revealing more discolored skin around his wrist, and a line of stitches that both dried in fresh blood, and he jerked his hand away from his arm and gripped the edge of the counter, leaning forward until his forehead was resting against the cold glass surface of the mirror. Breathe. Breathe. Breathe, damn it! Reaching out, he floundered fucking... I hate you, brain. You're moving way too fast for me. God, it's still the morning. Reaching out, he floundered blindly for a moment before his hand grasped the sink and turned on the faucet, summoning a stream of water. Leaning down, he stuck his hand under the flow of water before slapping his cheeks with his wet hand, trying to bring himself back to his senses. The cold water helped, thankfully, and after a few moments he was able to breathe easy again. Even if his heart hadn't calmed down yet, it was fine. He was fine. Everything's fine. Fuck. He just needed to sleep it off, and everything would be better in the morning. He couldn't have been more wrong in hindsight, honestly. Sucks to suck. While he did manage to fall asleep again, he woke up absolutely exhausted with a fit of coughing and pain in his chest. Yeah, it really sucks to suck there, man. Laying on the couch for a moment, he blinked slowly. Maybe he should just go back to bed? That was an option, right? Even if it never actually seemed to work out the way he wanted it to. Sleeping seemed like the go-to thing to do here, even if it hadn't worked for him before. He closed his eyes again and leaned back onto the pillow, grasping the blankets closer to his chest. The morning passed in a blur until he was finally startled awake again by a hand on his shoulder. Tensing, his eyes snapped open, but as soon as he saw the familiar, concerning face leaning over him, he relaxed and let his eyes close again. Good morning, Ed. You look awful, Ed replied immediately. Finally, I can't even say, I don't even know if that counts for an asshole remark, but... Good. Some asshole points. One asshole point. Tord could hear the frown in his voice. Taking back the asshole point. He didn't even have to open his eyes to look at his friend. I'm going to get you some soup. Don't try to get up, okay? The hand on his shoulder was gone, and for a minute he was disappointed. I'm a little disappointed too. There could have been a little comedy relief here. Forcing his eyes open again, he stared at the ceiling breathlessly, trying not to cough again. Maybe if he sat upright, it could help relieve some of the pain in his chest. Digging his hand into the cushion of the couch, he slid backwards, propping himself up on the pillow he had been sleeping on and the arm of the couch. He was facing away from the kitchen and towards the door to the apartment, meaning he couldn't easily see what Ed was doing in the kitchen. But that didn't stop him from trying and turning his head as far as he could to peer into the kitchen, looking for that familiar green sweatshirt his friend always wore. There was so many kitchen in this paragraph. He wasn't looking at the door when keys jingled in the lock and the door was suddenly pulled open. Hey, Ed, are you alive in there? An unknown voice. Oh, is this Tom? Fuck. I'm gonna say it's Tom. An unknown voice asked As Tord nearly jumped out of his own skin and jerked back towards the door, a stranger was standing there, his attention focused on a phone he was holding in one hand. There was a brief pause before he continued. The brief silence occupied the stranger tapping out a short message on his phone. "You missed movie night last night," the stranger added, finally looking up from his phone. Silence fell over the apartment as Tord's eyes locked with the stranger's eyes. Yup, it's Tom. I fucking called it, bitch. They were completely black. Hell, he couldn't even tell if they were actually eyes and not just holes. That wasn't normal in the slightest, and even just the sight of the weird eyeballs. Sight of the weird eyeballs. Fuck, I was so close. Or possibly lack thereof was enough to give him goosebumps. The hair on the back of his neck stood on end as his hands gripped the sheets tighter. Who was this person who had barged into Ed's apartment? They had to know each other, at least. Was this person friends with Ed? The hoodie they were wearing was rather similar, even if it was an ugly blue color instead of green. Well, we all know what colors Tord's least I can't. Jumbled words. We all know what Tord's least favorite color is. A+ for trying. Tord opened his mouth to break the uncomfortable silence that had fallen between them with a simple greeting when, rather abruptly, the stranger darted forward. The two hands grabbed roughly at the front of his hoodie, and, before he was really aware of what was going on, wind rushed past his ears and his head smashed into the floor. What the fuck happened? What? His vision blurred as dizziness quickly took a hold of him. The attack had happened so quickly he hadn't been able to even respond. Even now, lying on the floor, he had no idea what to do. Everything hurt all at once, but the strike to his head had left him too numb to actually cry out in pain. His head throbbed, his chest ached, his arm burned. Oh, that's nice. Coughing loudly, his left hand pressed against the stranger's chest. Get off, as he was pinned against the ground. Hands holding the collar of his hoodie tight, while a knee was shoved somewhere between his ribs. He couldn't breathe. Fuck. He was still coughing, and with this unknown man pinning him down, he couldn't even try to catch his breath. He was vaguely aware of someone yelling, but the noise was muffled by the rushing in his ears, as if a wall of water stood between him and whoever was screaming. But when the stranger leaned in close and hissed out a question, his words were crystal clear and absolutely soaked with malice. "Why? What are you doing here, Tord?" Oof. Gosh, this Tom is ballsy. Holy fucking shit. This Tom is fucking ballsy. God. Alright, you little fucking vigilante. I like that. I like that a lot. Even though, I don't know if Tom would actually do that. I'll have to ask my own Tom. But anyways, I still hate how I read. That's a complaint towards me. Hate how I read. Fucking get better, you stupid piece of shit. God damn. Ugh. I could, like, fucking do nursery rhymes and all that shit, but I can't fucking read anything like this. Why? Because my brain hates me. But yeah, second complaint, Ed still hasn't shown his asshole side at all from this little Siri fanfic thingy. And I'm a little disappointed, but it doesn't really matter, but I'm just a canon nitpicky whore. So, yeah, it's not an asshole. I'm a little disappointed. Anyway, now this video has gone way too long. So, yeah, that's it. Make sure to tap that like or subscribe button. They're kinky little bastards. They enjoy a good hit. Dork out.